The Book of the Damned by Charles Fort, Part 6. You are listening to Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, angels and demons and monsters and serpents. This is Brothers of the Serpent podcast, and we are coming to you not live from the 10 by 10 by 10 Tangent Cube of Science, nestled amongst the dusty bones of an ancient seabed high atop the Edwards Plateau in FEMA Region 6. Thank you for your courage. And yes, we say not live because what we mean by that is that this show is recorded similarly to a live broadcast. There's no editing. Kyle does add some music, on the fly, but otherwise it is completely unedited. So that's what
unless we really mess something up.
Yeah, which never happens. Zero mistakes, guys. Zero mistakes.
That's right.
So we are joined by our emergency backup watcher from deep beneath his secret chicken coop in secret outer space. Thanks for coming on, man. Appreciate the help.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
long-time listener, first-time watcher.
First-time watcher, but you were on. You were on with us. Let's see, you were.
He's been in multiple shows.
Yeah, he was part of Late Night. He was at episode 72.
Yeah, that's right. Episode 72. Oh boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I was on a couple, and then there was the one time we hijacked the studio to make our own Snake Rose.
That's right. Late Night. The infamous Late Night episode. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much. So Brenner is going to be in the background, helping us doing watcher duties. And amazing, I didn't hear the
I didn't
the
hear
secret
the rooster.
Yeah.
Yeah, he must have known we started recording. He's being nice.
I guess so. When we were talking to him earlier, we heard him like 4 or 5 times over the course of a minute, and now he's silent. All right. No rooster appearance this time. So let's see. Should we just go ahead and tackle Space Weather News? From spaceweather.com, a possible CME impact this week. The CME might sideswipe Earth's magnetic field on March 10th if it left the sun earlier today following the eruption of a magnetic filament. No sunspots were involved. This glancing blow could spark minor G1 class geomagnetic storms later this week. And also a rocket launch into pulsating auroras. Sometimes Arctic auroras do something strange and puzzling. They blink. Imagine a chessboard where the squares strobe, green, black, in a mesmerizing rhythm every 10 seconds. Researchers call these pulsating auroras, and over the weekend, NASA launched a rocket from Alaska to investigate. It was amazing, says Aurora chaser Marquetta S. Murray, who witnessed the launch from Poker Flat Research Range near Fairbanks. The sky was strobing overhead when the 2-stage Black Brant 9 took off straight into the mysterious pulsating auroras. The launch was highly successful, reports Alexa Halford of NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, the experiment's lead investigator, who had been waiting since February for the pulsations to begin, and we couldn't have asked for better conditions. Pulsating auroras are nothing new. Arctic people have been watching them for thousands of years. However, researchers have only recently figured out what powers them. In 2018, a team led by S. Kasahara of the University of Tokyo conclusively linked pulsating auroras to chorus waves in Earth's magnetosphere. Chorus waves are electromagnetic oscillations that sound heavenly when played through the loudspeaker of a low-frequency radio. They scatter electrons from space down to Earth, an oscillating rain which produces exotic, blinking northern lights. But this only scratches the surface of the mystery. We still have a lot to learn, says Halford. For instance, patches of light within pulsating auroras can maintain almost exactly the same shape from pulse to pulse. Why? No one knows. Also, the pulses flicker as often as 10 times a second, which is a rapid-fire modulation that has no easy explanation. Halford's rocket carried an experiment named LAMP directly into the pulsating auroras, sampling in situ magnetic fields and energetic particles that may offer clues to the mystery.
I love LAMP.
I love LAMP too. The experiment is specifically designed to look for microbursts of energetic electrons, the space equivalent of raindrops in a thunderstorm, that might explain these puzzling flickers. After launching the rocket, we need a break, says Halford, but We are looking forward to analyzing all the data we just got back, so stay tuned for updates.
Interesting.
Yeah. There's a strange electrical phenomena in space, in near space. Somebody should come up with some kind of theory that would help explain these phenomena. Current conditions, solar wind speed is 487.1 kilometers per second. The density is 4.6 protons per cubic centimeter. Sunspot number is 82. The neutron count is only 6.9% above the space age average. This keeps going down, so I find that interesting. As solar maximum is ramping up, or we're leaving solar minimum, those neutron counts are dropping. KP index is 2, quiet. 24-hour max was only 3, which is also quiet.
All right.
And that is your space weather news for the week.
Crypto update or what?
Oh, yeah. I do.
What's going on?
Everything's going down.
Oh.
Bitcoin, $37,312.06. And Ethereum is $2,454.71.
All right. Buyer's market.
It is a buyer's market. So I do have emails. You have stories.
Well.
And then we have a review.
No.
We've gotten a bunch of reviews. But one of them was interesting. We should go through.
Yeah. I have this one story, but it's long, and I actually want to do like a deep dive into it. So
okay. So we'll tackle that.
We could do a Patreon.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's do some emails. Okay. So last episode, I asked for more accounts of strange things raining from the sky. So we got one from Ann Who Knits, who is also a big supporter of the show, one of our biggest supporters. Says, hi, this is not about things falling from the sky, just an odd and slightly horrible story, a bit like Zachariah's bunnies. So if you've never listened to Where Did the Road Go, Zachariah has this terrible story about bunny rabbits running across the road and they were unable to stop. Like it was a whole flock of them. You remember that story? Yes. So Ann says this was more than 20 years ago in Illinois, where Route 15 crosses the Kashakia River, just north of New Athens. Very late, very dark. Headlights picked up small triangles scattered across the pavement. First thought was a dump truck lost part of its load of crushed rock. There was a quarry in the area, but they were evenly scattered over the whole area. Then I saw movement and realized they were frogs. A look at maps will show the extent of the swamps and cut-off meanders of the river, so no surprise there are frogs, but why did hundreds of them decide to leave the comfort of their swamp to gather on the road that night? Might be mating season, but why leave home? The slightly horrible part is there was no way for me to go around them all. Probably by morning, other creatures had cleaned up the unfortunates and there would be no sign of the night's mystery. So it's just an odd story about frogs doing odd things from Anne. But then she has an addendum. Frog story addendum. I suppose a refill load of frogs might have been carelessly dumped that night, and if I had been a bit earlier, I would have seen them falling from the sky, says Ann.
Yeah.
That's right. It sounds like you showed up just after the fall.
Oh, man. Flat frogs.
Okay. I have two more. These other two are in a different vein, but this one is from Jonathan, who we heard from weeks ago about the spirituality problem.
Oh, okay.
And John also says that they are called Something Wicked in the Discord. So I didn't know you were in the Discord. That's great. So it says, Dear Snake Bros, I'll be honest. I checked my email for days, then weeks, hoping for a response to my previous email. Sorry. I should say here.
Rookie mistake.
I should say here that I like to respond on the show. And if I don't read it on the show, I'm not going to write back because that would just be too much. But just keep writing in. It doesn't mean, I do read them all. Anyway, he says, what I got back in your second episode of Book of the Damned was the greatest I could have ever hoped for. I was listening casually this evening, and when I heard you read my email, I literally dropped my beer and had to sit down. I lit a smoke and listened intently, hoping for an anchor in this tossing sea of uncertainty. What I got wasn't an anchor, but maybe something better, a light, a beacon, a direction to swim in. The great answers in life are rarely handed to us. And what would they mean if they were? Your blatant honesty and obvious passion and emotion hit home with me, and for that I thank you. I'm coming to terms with the fact that maybe not knowing is okay, that maybe being uncertain is okay, that questioning everything, even if it is uncomfortable or even terrifying, is not only okay, but this is right somehow. I'll keep striving to find a path, a bedrock solid set of beliefs, but I'm sure I will fail, and maybe that's okay. Thank you so much for reading my email, for all your listening ears to hear. It is my hope that it will spark many a great and influential conversation as to who we are and what our place is in this world. I don't know if we're special in the grand scheme of things in the universal sense, but we are special to us, to human beings, and maybe that's enough, and that's okay with me. Thanks again for all you've done. Your discussions have shaken my brain and worldview to the core more times than I'm comfortable admitting. I wish you the best of luck, the happiest of days, and the fastest of internet connections. From John. Something wicked in the Discord. Snakes!
Cool. Well said.
Well,
Yeah.
very well said.
Yeah.
And, John, by the time you hear this, you're probably going to have already heard the other emailers' responses to your email, which we read on a previous show. Because, yes, like you said, you hope that it sparks conversations, and it did.
It did, yeah.
It absolutely did. So thanks for being a listener, John. Really appreciate that. Okay, this is the last email of the day. This one's a bit long, but this is from Josh. And I'll read the addendum first. He says, note, all of this was greatly abbreviated. That is all. But it's a long email. He's just saying this was, it was abbreviated.
Right. Okay.
So I believe you. So the title is, You Guys Helped Save My Life. Kyle and Russ, I'm going to do my best to keep this concise despite my penchant for, is that, how do you say that? Penchant? Penchant?
Penchant?
Penchant, yeah.
I
For
guess.
rambling pontification or tangents. I'm not expecting that you read this on air, though you are absolutely free to do so. My name is Josh. Y'all know me as Comfy. That's right. So Comfy is also in the Discord. It's a stage name. I was a professional rapper for more than a decade. Probably not in the way you're imagining it. Personal lore, moving on. I have been interested in alternative archaeology since college, when things didn't add up in my anthropology, sociology, history, archaeology, etc. I went for law enforcement and walked away with a BS, comically fitting, in social science and questioning what I had spent my last 5 years listening to and learning. So I am a college graduate. Yay. I was a father before I started college, and I was doing it solo. Her mother didn't contact me until she was almost 6.5. So that's more personal lore, but it'll make more sense quicker than Marty and the UFOs, I promise. Long story short, a young me made some retrospectively awful decisions for economic reasons. My daughter's mother showed up almost out of nowhere, and all of a sudden I had freedom I'd not known. Keep in mind, I'm only 22 at this point, alongside a pretty high cost of living for a single father going to college full-time in Southern Oregon in the early aughts. This ended badly, and I did some time. I cleaned up my life and found work on a farm, and that was my life until I was about 34. Then I met my ex-wife, best 3 years of my life this far, and also produced my second daughter. This also ended badly. She hid addiction from me while the small empire I had built slowly disappeared behind my back. A lot of other drama, and I filed for divorce only to find out that I was already in divorce proceedings, our joint bank account frozen, she was gone into the mountains of Humboldt County in California, and at that point, for all intents and purposes, she was gone completely. No way on earth to find her that wasn't life-threatening, so I did my best to move on. And slowly this wore me down, and I fell into heroin addiction. Hard. From age 37 to 41, I was on the streets of Oakland, as homeless and hopeless as it gets. But I always had a phone. And podcasts kept me grounded. Like familiar voices not involved with the shit life I was living, it would take me out of the reality that being a homeless drug addict forces on a person. Of course, it was Joe, meaning Joe Rogan, I think. I'd been listening to Joe for almost 10 years, and he got me up to speed with Graham and introduced me to Randall, who turned me on to Grimerica, who then inevitably led me to you. The first episode I listened to from you was Impossiblocks. Your energy, synergy, and whether you've been told this or not, pure love and authenticity that you guys exude made you immediately stand out from the 50 or so podcasts I had in my library. The questions I had from college were being discussed, and some questions answered, even. It sparked up the kindling fire I'd had for 2 decades. My whole world was shifted and my priorities changed. I was so interested and amazed that all the crazy shit I'd been pondering for the better part of my life was shared. I felt community for the first time in way too long. I now had a reason to change, and change I did. Within a month, I was at New Bridge, which is an infamous rehab center in Berkeley that is one of a kind in the world and more like prison than any rehab most people imagine. Just Google it and marvel how behind the scenes they keep what is really happening there. But I graduated, went through 6 months of aftercare, and then COVID hit, but I stayed sober and I still am. I moved in with my mother in far north in California because she is elderly and needs the help, and I'm an ex-junkie that has had a life-changing epiphany and needs a place to matter. I've been here now a year and a half. I see both of my daughters regularly. I have a cat, and I have a plan and a goal. Now, I can't say that none of this would have happened if I had never heard of you guys, but I can most certainly say that it has made it so much easier. And it continues to do so every day through the shows, the Discord, and the shows you have turned me on to. Way more than Rogan, by the way. 3 years ago, I was about as lost a cause as you can imagine, and now I'm listening, writing, researching, planning, and I'm happy. I'm ending it here for fear it's already a little disjointed and confusing, but it's just meant to flesh out the magnitude of me saying that you, Russ and Kyle, have been a saving grace for me and my family. It comes from an emotional place. Thank you both for everything you didn't know you did for my life. Effing cheers, bros, from Josh.
Holy shit. Woo. That's, try not to cry, bro.
Warm and fuzzies, buddy.
Warm and fuzzies. That's
yeah, thank you so much. Very intense life story, and, you know, I'm really glad that it's helped you out. And, you know, getting emails like that helps us so much, too.
Yeah.
It really does. So thank you. That's all I can think of to say. And man, it's awesome. I want to know what are you writing? What are you researching? I know you're in the Discord. Let me know. I've been talking to you in the Discord about building a computer. So, you know, but you didn't tell me you're like writing and researching. You just said you're playing video games. But yeah, thank you so much for the email. Both of you, from John and Josh.
Yeah. I don't even know what to say other than thank you. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah. Really amazing. So should we tackle this review now that we've got those two amazing emails out of the way? Okay. Let's just open it up on here. I don't have it.
Let's see here.
Yeah, there it is. So yeah, we've been getting some good reviews, but we got a recent 3-star one that I found interesting.
3 stars.
3 stars. The title of the review is triple question mark. And it's, is this podcast really just some guy reading a book for 2 hours at a time over multiple podcasts until he gets to the end of it, question mark. And now, every now and then, some other guy chimes in the background, question mark. And if that is what this is, comma, could you not have the person reading the book with a little bit better reading skills, question mark. A lot of stumbling over words and not putting the punctuation in a proper spot, period.
You're not supposed to start sentences with and, which you did twice. And then this second or third question about could you not have the person reading the book? Is that supposed to mean we do have a person reading the book with better skills and we shouldn't have that? It's not a double negative. So, but anyway, thanks for the review.
Yeah, thanks for the review. I
3
really
stars.
appreciate that. 3 stars from Canada.
And it's I'm not some other guy.
You're just some guy chiming in the background.
I'm the chiminator. Not some other guy. That's great.
You're the background guy.
This is great.
Clearly, this person has never read Charles Fort.
Neither have I.
Right. I promise you that it's Fort that has the punctuation problem. But I do stumble over words sometimes. Sorry. It is an unedited show. All right. Anything else?
No.
No? Should we just start the book or take a break?
Yeah. Let's.
You want to just start the book now?
Might as well.
Okay. So we left off with we were reading about thunderstones, and there was this interesting thing about all these thunderstones found in these trees, and they were using them instead of axes. Remember?
Yeah.
though it would never occur because they were doing it secretly and stealing trees from people in a jungle secretly. And it would apparently never occur to anybody that the head of an axe is a wedge. So, in the proceedings of the Royal Irish Academy, there is an account of a stone wedge that fell from the sky near Cashel and Tipperary, August 2nd, 1865. This phenomenon is not questioned, but the orthodox preference is to call it not axe-like nor wedge-shaped, but pyramidal. For data of other pyramidal stones said to have fallen from the sky, see the report of the British Association in 1861. One fell at Segowali in India, March 6, 1853. Of the object that fell at Cashel, Dr. Houghton says in the proceedings, quote, "A singular feature is observable in this stone that I have never seen in any other. The rounded edges of the pyramid are sharply marked by lines on the black crust, as perfect as if made by a ruler," unquote. Dr. Houghton's idea is that the marks may have been made by some peculiar tension in the cooling. It must have been very peculiar if in all aerolites not wedge-shaped, no such phenomenon has ever been observed. It merges away with one or two instances known after Dr. Houghton's time of seeming stratification in meteorites. Stratification in meteorites, however, is denied by the faithful. If someone should study the stone of Cashel as Champollion studied the Rosetta Stone, he might, or rather would inevitably, find meaning in those lines and translate them into English. Nevertheless, I began to suspect something else, something more subtle and esoteric than graven characters upon stones that have fallen from the sky in attempts to communicate. The notion that other worlds are attempting to communicate with this world is widespread. My own notion is that it is not attempt at all. It was achievement centuries ago. I should like to send out a report that a thunderstone had fallen, say, somewhere in New Hampshire, and then keep track of every person who came to examine that stone and trace down his affiliations and keep track of him. And then send out a report that a thunderstone had fallen at Stockholm, say. Would one of the persons who had gone to New Hampshire be met again in Stockholm? But what if he had no anthropological, lapidarian, or meteorological affiliations, but did belong to a secret society? This is only a dawning credulity.
So what is he saying?
His conspiracy guy is coming out here. He's beginning to intimate something that he does get into later, where he's basically like, I think we've been, all this stuff about the Super Sargasso Sea or these big giant cargo ships in space dropping stuff. He thinks that basically paleo contact has been made a long time ago, and that there are secret societies on Earth that know about it and are involved in some way. Okay. So certain things fall out of the sky, and these guys will show up to read the message. So what he's saying here is he wants to do a little experiment. Let's have a thunderstone drop somewhere in New Hampshire and see who shows up to study it, and then have one drop in somewhere else and see if any of the same people show up to study it that also aren't meteorologists or people studying meteors or whatever.
Okay.
Yeah. Now we shall have something that is high up in the castes of the accursed. And Comptus Rendus, 1887, that upon June 20th, 1887, in a violent storm, 2 months before the reported fall of the symmetric iron object of Brixton, a small stone had fallen from the sky at Tarbes, France, 13 millimeters in diameter, 5 millimeters thick, weight 2 grams, reported to the French Academy by a professor of the normal school. This time, the old convenience, quote, there in the first place, unquote, is too greatly resisted. The stone was covered in ice. So that's interesting. They weren't able to say it was already on the ground because it was covered in ice and it fell in June. So this implies that it came from somewhere high up in the sky where it's cold. This object had been cut and shaped by means similar to human hands and human mentality. It was a disc of worked stone. There's not a word as to any known whirlwind anywhere. Nothing of other objects or debris that fell at or near this date in France. The thing had fallen alone, But as mechanically as any part of a machine responds to its stimulus, the explanation appears that this stone had been raised by a whirlwind and then flogged down. It may be that in the whole 19th century, no event more important than this occurred. But not a word of discussion, nor a subsequent mention that I can find. Our own expression? What matters it how we, the French Academy or the Salvation Army, may explain? Because a disc of worked stone fell from the sky in France in June of 1887.
That's, 2 grams. He describes it in millimeters.
Yeah.
It's this tiny piece. Like, how did they even find it?
Yeah. Yep, that's a good question. Chapter 9. Of all meteorites in museums, very few were seen to fall. It is considered sufficient grounds for admission if specimens can't be accounted for in any way other than that they fell from the sky, as if in the haze of uncertainty that surrounds all things, or that is the essence of everything, or in the merging away of everything into something else, there could be anything that could be accounted for in only one way. The scientist and the theologian reasoned that if something can be accounted for in only one way, it is accounted for in that way. Or logic would be logical if the conditions that it imposes, but, of course, does not insist upon, could anywhere be found in quasi-existence. In our acceptance, logic, science, art, religion are, in our existence, premonitions of a common awakening, like dawning awarenesses of surroundings in the mind of the dreamer. Any old chunk of metal that measures up to the standard of true meteoritic material is admitted by museums. It may seem incredible that modern curators still have this delusion, but we suspect that the date on one's morning newspaper hasn't much to do with one's modernity all day long. In reading Fletcher's catalog, for instance, we learn that some of the best-known meteorites were found in draining a field, or found in making a road, or turned up by the plow, and this occurs dozens of times. Someone fishing in Lake Okeechobee brought up an object in his fishing net. No meteorite had ever been seen to fall near it, but the U.S. National Museum accepts it. If we have accepted only one of the data of untrue meteoritic material, one instance of carbonaceous matter, if it be too difficult to utter the word coal, we see that in this inclusion-exclusion, as in every other means of forming an opinion, false inclusion and false exclusion have been practiced by curators of museums. So all of that's interesting. He's right. Most meteorites are accepted not because they were seen to fall, but because of their composition and other internal structures. So he's just saying, like, having it be seen to fall isn't necessarily necessary for something to be accepted to have fallen from the sky.
Right.
And then it's interesting here how he mentions the, like this carbonaceous matter, because it's too hard to say coal. They don't want to say coal. It's just, it's a carbonaceous thing. In Science, Volume 31, E.D. Hovey of the American Museum of Natural History asserts or confesses that often have objects of materials such as fossiliferous limestone and slag been sent to him. He says that these things have been accompanied by assurances that they have been seen to fall on lawns, on roads, and in front of houses. But they are all excluded. They are not of true meteoritic material. They were on the ground in the first place. It is only by coincidence that lightning has struck, or that a real meteorite which was unfindable has struck near objects of slag and limestone. Mr. Hovey says that the list might be extended indefinitely. That's a tantalizing suggestion of some very interesting stuff. He says, but this is not worthwhile. But I'd like to know what strange, damned, excommunicated things have been sent to museums by persons who have felt convinced that they have seen what they may have seen, strongly enough to risk ridicule, to make up bundles, go to express offices, and write letters. I accept that over the door of every museum into which such things enter is written, "Abandon hope." Don't send it to Smithsonian, where mysteries have been disappearing for hundreds of years. All right. It's break time.
Yep. We'll be right back.
Yep.
back, ladies and gentlemen. Segment 2 with 2 watchers now.
We have 2 watchers.
First time in all of Watcher history.
All those episodes with no watcher, and now we have 2. Also, happy birthday to Chip.
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah, man. Chip's a big supporter of the show. Lives on Ometepe. I don't know. I can't remember how to. The mountain, a volcanic mountain in Nicaragua, and he was one of the prime movers and shakers behind the huge episode 201 gift boxes. So, and Chip is also an admin in the Discord, so he's been with us a long time. So, happy birthday, buddy.
Yeah, happy birthday. Have a beer.
Or 5.
We'll have to go
or
get
12.
some.
Yeah, we'll have to crack a book report beer for Chip.
Birthday beers.
Yeah. Okay, so in the Manchester Lit and Phil Soak Mems, let's see, what would that be? Manchester Literature and Philosophical Society Memoirs, I think. It's argued that certain roundish stones that have been found in coal are fossil aerolites, that they have fallen from the sky ages ago when the coal was soft because the coal had closed around them, showing no sign of entrance. In the Proceedings of the Society of Antiquities of Scotland, they say that in a lump of coal from a mine in Scotland, an iron instrument had been found. Quote, "The interest attaching to this singular relic arises from the fact of its having been found in the heart of a piece of coal 7 feet under the surface," unquote. So if we accept that this object of iron was of workmanship beyond the means and skill of the primitive men who may have lived in Scotland when the coal was forming there, then this instrument was considered to be modern. So our expression has more of realness or higher approximation to realness than has the attempt to explain that is made in the proceedings, that in modern times someone may have bored for coal and that his drill may have broken off in the coal that it had penetrated. Why he should have abandoned such easily accessible coal, I don't know. The important point here is that there was no sign of boring, that this instrument was in a lump of coal that had closed around it so that its presence was not suspected until the lump was broken. No mention can I find of this damned thing in any other publication. Of course, there is an alternative here. The thing may not have fallen from the sky. If in coal-forming times in Scotland there were indigenous to this earth no men capable of making such an iron instrument, it may have been left behind by visitors from other worlds. So the section we're getting into here now is more like Fort's accounts of out-of-place artifacts.
Cool, but real quick, about the carbonaceous chondrites.
Yeah.
Can you burn them?
I don't know. That's a good question.
Because he's trying to say that they don't want to call it coal, but it's like, is it? I don't know. I'd be curious to know if you could burn it like you can burn.
Yeah,
coal.
watchers, find out what carbonaceous chondrites are made of.
It's a race.
Yeah, but the other thing he's pointing out here is their attempt to explain it away. Like, so it's found in coal. This iron object is found in coal. They don't question that it was found in the coal. It's like, in other words, these people are. Otherwise, that's how they would dismiss it, right? That it was found in the coal. There's no question there. But what they try to say is, well, somebody drilled and the drill bit broke off.
Right.
But it was closed up in the piece of coal. In other words, it had no visible entry.
Yeah.
Okay. In Notes and Queries, Volume 11, there is an account of an ancient copper seal about the size of a penny found in chalk at a depth of 5 or 6 feet near Bredenstone in England, or Bredenstone. The design upon it is said to be of a monk kneeling before a virgin and child. A legend upon the margin is said to be, quote, Saint Jordanus Monarchy Spaldingi, or something. There's a wretch of an ultra-frowsy thing in the Scientific American, which we condemn ourselves if somewhere, because of the oneness of allness, the damned must also be the damning. It's a newspaper story that about the 1st of June, 1851, a powerful blast in Massachusetts cast out from a bed of solid rock, a bell-shaped vessel of an unknown metal, floral designs inlaid with silver, the art of some cunning workman, is the quote. The opinion of the editor of the Scientific American is that the thing had been made by Cain, who was the first inhabitant. Though I fear that this is a little arbitrary, I am not disposed to fly rapidly at every scientific opinion. All right, what do we got here? Carbonaceous chondrites. A class of chondritic. Did we read these before? Class of chondritic meteorites composing at least 8 known groups and many ungrouped meteorites. They include some of the most primitive known meteorites. The C chondrites represent only a small proportion, 4.6% of meteorite falls. They are arguably the most important class of meteorite for 3 reasons. First, members of the Ci group, or carbonaceous chondrite group, have the most primitive bulk compositions. Their non-volatile element compositions are very similar to that of the sun. They are mostly crystalline in structure and wouldn't necessarily lend themselves to burning. But they do burn on entry. Yeah, everything does. So yeah, maybe it doesn't sound like they're made of coal.
But they do look glassy,
Yeah.
right? A little bit.
Yeah, I think so. I wonder what they mean by most primitive. Their non-volatile element compositions are very similar to that of the sun. That's interesting. Okay. In Nature, volume 35, a block of metal was found in coal in Austria in 1885. It is now in the Salzburg Museum. So this time we have another expression. Usually our intermediate attack upon provincial positivism is science, in its attempted positivism takes something such as true meteoritic material as a standard of judgment. But carbonaceous matter, except for its relative infrequency, is just as veritable a standard of judgment. Carbonaceous matter merges away into such a variety of organic substances that all standards are reduced to indistinguishability. If, then, there is no real standard against us, there is no real resistance to our own acceptances.
No, they posted a picture. That doesn't look very glassy.
Oh, yeah. It does look like, well, I don't know. This looks like stone to me.
Yeah, it's just a rock.
It is a rock. Now, our intermediatism is science takes true meteoritic material as a standard of admission, but now we have an instance that quite truly makes true meteoritic material a standard of exclusion, or then a thing that denies itself as no real resistance to our own acceptances. This depending upon whether we have a datum of something of true meteoritic material that orthodoxy can never accept fell from the sky. So what he's talking about there, that long thing, is he's talking about this block of metal found in the coal in Austria. It is metallic and of the kind that you would normally say is meteoritic,
from the sky.
except that it looks like a cube. It's like a block, right? In other words, it looks worked. So they can't say that it fell from the sky. So Fort says, we're a little involved here. Our own acceptance is upon a carved geometric thing that, if found in a very old deposit, antedates human life, except perhaps very primitive human life, as an indigenous product of this earth. But we're quite as much interested in the dilemma it made for the faithful, meaning the scientific community. So it is of true meteoritic material. In L'Astronomy, the magazine, 1887, it is said that, though so geometric, its phenomena so characteristic of meteorites exclude the idea that it was the work of man. As to the deposit it was found in, tertiary coal. Composition is iron, carbon, and a small quantity of nickel. So basically space steel. Yeah. It has the pitted surface that is supposed by the faithful to be characteristic of meteorites. For a full account of this subject, see Comptes Rendus, volume 103, page 702. The scientists who examined it could reach no agreement. They bifurcated, and then a compromise was suggested, but the compromise is a product of disregard. They say it was of true meteoritic material, but it had not been shaped by man, that it was not of true meteoritic material, but telluric iron that had been shaped by man, or that it was true meteoritic material that had fallen from the sky, but had been shaped by man after the fall. The data, one or more of which must be disregarded by each of these 3 explanations, are true meteoritic material and surface markings of meteorite, geometric form, presence in an ancient deposit, material as hard as steel, absence upon this earth in tertiary times of men who could work in material as hard as steel. It is said that, though of true meteoritic material, this object is virtually a steel object. So he lists the three explanations that these scientists gave in this journal after much discussion and study. And he says that each one has to ignore at least one of the aspects of the object.
Mutually exclusive.
Yeah. We offer ours as the only synthetic expression. For instance, in Science Gossip, 1887, it is described as a meteorite. In this account, there is nothing alarming to the pious because, though everything else is told, its geometric form is not mentioned. But it's a cube, and there is a deep incision all the way around it. Of its faces, two that are opposite are rounded. A yarn in the London Times, June 22nd, 1844, says that some workmen quarrying rock close to the Tweed, about a quarter of a mile below Rutherford Mills, discovered a gold thread embedded in the stone at a depth of 8 feet, that a piece of the gold thread had been sent to the office of the Chronicle.
Wait.
Yeah, we're going to another account here.
Yeah, but I thought he said it was a quarter of a mile under something, and then he says it was at a depth of 8 feet.
A quarter of a mile below Rutherford Mills, which I think he means south.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But you're right, that is confusing. It was found at a depth of 8 feet, a quarter of a mile south of Rutherford Mills. Below, on the map.
Okay, all right.
It was a pretty little thing, not at all frowsy, and rather damnable. London Times, December 24th, 1851. Hiram DeWitt of Springfield, Massachusetts, returning from California, had brought with him a piece of auriferous quartz, about the size of a man's fist. It was accidentally dropped, split open, and there was a nail in it. There was a cut iron nail, the size of a sixpenny nail, slightly corroded. It was entirely straight and had a perfect head. So yeah, some of these are out-of-place artifacts that I recognize from other publications. A communication by Sir David Brewster in the report of the British Association in 1845 says that a nail had been found in a block of stone from a quarry in North Britain. The block in which the nail was found was 9 inches thick, but as to what part of the quarry it had come from, there is no evidence, except that it could not have been from the surface. The quarry had been worked about 20 years. It consisted of alternate layers of hard stone and a substance called till. The point of the nail, quite eaten with rust, projected into some till on the surface of the block of stone. The rest of the nail lay upon the surface of the stone to within an inch of the head, and that inch of it was embedded in the stone. That one sounds familiar as well.
Till? Like glacial till?
Yeah. Or that's what they called it, till, but it's basically like you think of like a layer of hard stone that they're quarrying for, and then when you dig through that, there's a few feet or maybe inches, I don't know, of softer material that they call till, and then when you get through that, there's another layer of stone. So it had been being worked for 20 years, and they had cut a block out of there, and in the top of this block was a nail was, held in the block, implying that it was dropped in there when this stuff was still soft sediment. According to the Carson Appeal, there had been found in a mine quartz crystals that could have had only 15 years in which to form. And where a mill had been built, sandstone had been found, and when the mill was torn down, that had hardened in 12 years. That in this sandstone was a piece of wood with a nail in it. So this one I found confusing. I think he's like listing multiple things here, but the first thing is in a mine, quartz crystals that could have had only 15 years in which to form.
So he's suggesting that
That sometimes this can happen fast.
Yeah, the idea is like the geology or geological science says that these things take a ridiculously long time to form, but they can possibly form really fast.
Yeah. Right, because I presume in the mine, they had dug out the mine and there were no quartz crystals, and then they go back in 15 years later and there's like some macro crystals sticking out of the wall, and they're like, wow, these have grown since we mined this place. Oh, we got a till is any substance laid down directly or revamped by a glacier. Thanks, watchers, whichever watcher that was. One of the watchers. So then the other thing that's said here is a mill had been built And where it was built, sandstone was found. And when the mill was torn down, it had hardened in 12 years. And that in this sandstone was a piece of wood with a nail in it. So again, I think what he's implying there is the piece of wood with a nail in it is from the mill.
Right. It just, yes.
Now it looks ancient, but it was a known modern object that is now looking like it's embedded in stone. That at the meeting of the British Association in 1853, Sir David Brewster announced that he had to bring before the meeting an object, quote, of so incredible in nature that nothing short of the strongest evidence was necessary to render the statement at all probable, unquote. A crystal lens had been found in the treasure house at Nineveh. In many of the temples and treasure houses of old civilizations upon this earth have been preserved things that have fallen from the sky, or meteorites. Carpenter, in The Microscope and Its Revelations, gives 2 drawings of this lens. Carpenter argues that it is impossible to accept that optical lenses had ever been made by the ancients. But it never occurred to him, someone a million miles or so up in the air, looking through his telescope, and his lens drops out. This does not appeal to Carpenter. He says that this object must have been an ornament. But according to Brewster, it was not an ornament, but a true optical lens. In that case, in the ruins of an old civilization upon this earth, has been found an accursed thing that was acceptably not a product of any old civilization indigenous to this earth.
But I would argue that if they could make... Oh, wow. Is that a picture of it?
Nice. Yeah, so this is...
If they could make these stone bowls...
Yeah, I agree.
Precisely, then they sure could carve a piece of glass into the...
Absolutely. A piece of crystal. Yeah. So I think that... So I can't tell here because, when I'm reading through this, I'm not sure where Fort is falling. Like, I would say that what he's pointing out is more of a problem of the model of looking at prehistory.
Yeah.
But what he's doing is interesting, right? Like standard model archaeologists and anthropologists, they all hate the ancient aliens thing. But I feel like what Ford is pointing out here, even if he doesn't mean to, is that the ancient aliens thing comes from the standard model and its inability to accept objects like this.
Right.
So people are going to say, well, if no human civilization made it, then it must have been aliens.
Right.
Because the object exists. Right.
Yeah, and it was made.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so they, in the same vein, they don't study the vases.
Yes, that's right.
They don't measure them precisely to see what the accuracy or precision is.
Yeah.
Because you can't claim that nobody made those.
Yeah, that's right. And it's like, are they just not studying them because it would, to really study them in detail would bring up too many problems?
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah. So a watcher is saying the argument is that on this Nineveh lens is that although it does function as a lens, it was probably a piece of jewelry. That's exactly what, yes. Let's see. Carpenter says that. Carpenter, in The Microscope and Its Revelations, argues that it is impossible to accept that optical lenses had ever been made by the ancients. Now, I remember, when I was looking into ancient mysteries, the whole thing about optical lenses came up multiple times. And that people had found, and sometimes it was credible, scientists, like archaeologists, people digging, had found things that appeared to be optical lenses. Like even if it was just maybe not a piece of a telescope or a microscope, but a magnifying glass of some kind. And the standard model or orthodoxy was just completely unable to accept that could have been made by ancient people, because to them that the formation of actual careful grinding of optical lenses is a very recent thing, 1800s or maybe, I don't know the date, but so this guy who wrote a book called Microscope and Its Revelations is just completely unable to accept that the ancients made such a thing. But Brewster, the guy who presented it to the meeting at the British Association, says it's not an ornament, but a true optical lens.
Yeah.
So the optical people are like, that's just a coincidence. You know, it was made to look pretty. It just so happens to also work as a lens. That's their argument. Okay. Skipping quite a bit
And
here.
it's just completely impossible that the person who made it might have noticed what it did with light.
Right. Might be dangerous to wear as a piece of jewelry if it's actually an optical lens. You know, if you're wearing it on your neck there and it's like the sun hits it right, it's going to burn.
That explains spontaneous combustion.
All right, so deep into chapter 12 now. We're skipping quite a bit here. I wonder if I should summarize some of this. He talks about Halley's Comet. He talks about... he goes into a bunch of stuff about astronomers, and he's just like, look, there's all these things that don't work out. And he points out that these comets are supposed to have, basically a regular orbit or whatever, but then they don't go by the predictions. And then the astronomers are like, well, it was, they give these weasel words to say it was a little late or it came a little early or it never showed up at all, He does the same thing he talks about some of the eclipses, but he keeps saying about the eclipses and this other stuff that we're going to get into it in more detail later, so I'm skipping most of this stuff. Oh, he also talks about the discovery of Neptune and how because he's saying like, oh, they're supporting the whole, Newtonian laws of gravitation by pointing out that they discovered Neptune using them. But then he points out that if you look at the details, that Neptune actually didn't fit Newton's laws of gravitation and what they were looking for, and it was totally in the wrong place. And now they're still looking for something out there. So yes.
Is that still the case?
Yeah. They still think there's something out there. Still to this day, people are looking for Planet 9, they call it now, because Pluto's no longer a planet. It's not Planet 10 anymore.
Okay.
But yeah, they still think there's something large out there, out in the Kuiper Belt that's causing perturbations in the orbits of those outer planets. Which is why they started...
So it's outside because, something further away.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Uranus was being moved around by something, and they looked out and they found Neptune, but Neptune actually doesn't fit the movements. So using that as like, saying that the laws of gravitation are flawless is not quite right. Because the only way you can say it's flawless is like, well, we found Neptune using them, but Neptune's not the right one, which means there's something more out there, which is the assumption. But Fort's just saying, well, don't use that as saying like, this is why the law of gravitation is true. Because it didn't work out. Okay.
So Watcher says the earliest compound microscope was around 1600 AD by Zachariah Janssen. Janssen. It's very close to Janssen.
All right. So deep into chapter 12, Fort says, I accept that, though we're usually avoided, probably for moral reasons, sometimes this Earth has been visited by explorers. So again, this is going into his alien stuff. Usually for moral reasons, they avoid us. So this is like, you see these same conversations happening in modern day ufology. Why don't they just reveal themselves? Or why do they do it in this weird way? Fort struggles with the same question. He says, I think that the notion that there have been extra mundane visitors to China within what we call the historic period will be only ordinarily absurd when we come to that data. I accept that some of the other worlds are of conditions very similar to our own. I think of others that are very different, so that visitors from them could not live here without artificial adaptations. How some of them could breathe our attenuated air if they came from a gelatinous atmosphere, maybe masks. Maybe the masks that have been found in ancient deposits. Most of them are of stone and are said to have been ceremonial regalia of savages. But the mask that was found in Sullivan County in Missouri in 1879, listed in the American Antiquarian, Volume 3, was made of iron and silver. And just a little tidbit he throws in there at the very end of the chapter. I basically was going to skip that entire chapter until I got to that bit. Now, chapter 11. One of the damnedest of our data. In the Scientific American, September 10th, 1910, Charles F. Holder writes, quote, Many years ago, a strange stone, resembling a meteorite, fell into the valley of the Yaqui in Mexico, and the sensational story went from one end to the other of the country, that a stone bearing human inscriptions had descended to the earth, unquote. The bewildering observation here is Mr. Holder's assertion that this stone did fall. It seems to me that he must mean that it fell by dislodgement from a mountainside into a valley. But we shall see that it was such a marked stone that very unlikely would it have been unknown to dwellers in a valley if it had been reposing upon a mountainside above them. It may have been carelessness, intent may have been to say that a sensational story of a strange stone said to have fallen, etc. This stone was reported by Major Frederick Burnham of the British Army. Later, Major Burnham revisited it, and Mr. Holder accompanied him. Their purpose was to decipher the inscriptions upon it if possible. Quote, this stone was a brown igneous rock, its longest axis 8 feet, and on the eastern face, which had an angle of about 45 degrees, was a deep-cut inscription, unquote. Mr. Holder says that he recognized familiar Mayan symbols in the inscription. His method was the usual method by which anything can be identified as anything else, that is, to pick out whatever is agreeable and disregard the rest. He says that he has demonstrated that most of the symbols are Mayan. One of the characters upon this stone is a circle within a circle. Similar character found by Mr. Holder is a Mayan manuscript. And there are 2 sixes. Sixes can be found in Mayan manuscripts. A double scroll. There are dots and there are dashes. Well then, we, in turn, disregard the circle within a circle and the double scroll and emphasize that 6s occur in this book and that dots are plentiful. And would be even more plentiful if it were customary to use the small I for the first personal pronoun. And that when it comes to dashes, we have demonstrated we are Mayan. Because I remember in the very beginning I was saying he loves the hyphenations.
Yeah.
So he's basically saying, well, if you can point to dots and dashes and say this is like Mayan script, well, his book must be Mayan because it's full of them. I suppose the tendency is to feel that we're sneering at some valuable archaeological work and that Mr. Holder did make a veritable identification. He writes, quote, I submitted the photographs to the Field Museum and the Smithsonian and 1 or 2 others, and to my surprise, the reply was that they could make nothing out of it, unquote. Our indefinite acceptance by preponderance of 3 or 4 groups of museum experts against one person is that a stone bearing inscriptions unassimilable with any known language upon this earth is said to have fallen from the sky. Another poor wretch of an outcast belonging here is noted in the Scientific American, volume 48, an object or a meteorite that fell in February 16, 1883, in Italy. A false report was circulated that one of the fragments bore the impress of a hand. That is all that is findable by me upon this mere gasp of a thing. Intermediatistically, my acceptance is that, though in the course of human history there have been some notable approximations, there never has been a real liar, that he could not survive in intermediateness, where everything merges away or has its pseudo-base in something else. It would be instantly translated to the negative absolute. So my acceptance is that, though curtly dismissed, there was something to base upon in this report, that there were unusual markings upon this object. Of course, that is not to jump to the conclusion that they were cuneiform characters that looked like fingerprints. So yeah, that long section there about the object with the hand on, I'm not sure what he's trying to say there about intermediateness and that there's no true liar. I think what he's getting at is that something weird happened, but he doesn't think it's like got cuneiform writing on it or an actual handprint. But in other words, something with strange markings on it fell from the sky in Italy. Altogether, he says, I think that in some of our past expressions we must have been very efficient. If the experience of Mr. Simmons be typical, remember Mr. Simmons is the meteorologist guy that went around investigating coal that fell out of the sky. So indefinite are we becoming here. Just here we are interested in many things that have been found, especially in the United States, which speak of a civilization or of many civilizations not indigenous to this earth. So again, he's basing that on the standard accepted civilizations of indigenous United States.
Right.
One trouble is that in trying to decide whether they fell here from the sky or were left behind by visitors from other worlds, we have a notion that there have been disasters aloft and that coins have dropped here, that inhabitants of this earth found them or saw them fall and then made coins imitatively. It may be that coins were showered here by something of a tutelary nature that undertook to advance us from the stage of barter to the use of a medium. If coins should be identified as Roman coins, we've had so much experience with identifications that we know a phantom when we see one. But even so, how could Roman coins have got to North America, far into the interior of North America, and buried under the accumulation of centuries of soil unless they did drop from wherever the Romans first came from? Ignatius Donnelly in Atlantis gives a list of objects that have been found in mounds that are supposed to antedate all European influence in America, lathe-made articles, such as traders from somewhere would supply to savages, marks of the lathe said to be unmistakable. Said to be, of course, we can't accept that anything is unmistakable. So again, there, what he's pointing out is that we're told people here the savages, quote unquote, here couldn't lathe objects. And yet in mounds, lathed objects have been found.
Yeah.
So the implication is, what were these traded here? Well, then that implies diffusionism, which is not quite the accepted, isolationist model. In the report of the Smithsonian Institution in 1881, there is an account by Charles C. Jones of 2 silver crosses that were found in Georgia. They are skillfully made, highly ornamented, but are not conventional crucifixes. All their arms are of equal length. Mr. Jones is a good positivist that DeSoto had halted at the precise spot where these crosses were found. But the spirit of negativeness that lurks in all things said to be precise shows itself in that one of these crosses an inscription that has no meaning in Spanish or any other known terrestrial language.
Wow, man, I'd like to see those.
Yeah.
So they stopped digging when they found them?
I guess, I don't know. In 1881. But it was in the report of the Smithsonian Institution.
Of course.
Yeah. Maybe whether they stop digging or not, we're going to stop this segment. Take a break. Ladies and gentlemen, Brothers of the Serpent podcast, second half of the show. And we were talking about these silver crosses, highly ornamented silver crosses found in Georgia in 1881, reported in the Smithsonian Institute report. So it's interesting here, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk about this is because he does say that the inscription has no meaning in Spanish or any other known terrestrial language. But then he lists the letters that I guess they look like. IYNKICIDU, which looks like a version of Enkidu or Inkisidu.
Oh, that's interesting.
According to Mr. Jones. He thinks that this is a name and that there is an aboriginal ring to it, though I should say myself that he was thinking of the far distant Inca, that the Spanish donor cut on the cross of the name of an Indian to whom it was presented. But we look at the inscription ourselves and see that the letters said to be C and D are turned the wrong way, and that the letter said to be a K is not only turned the wrong way, but is also upside down, which doesn't match with a Spanish presenting a gift to the Inca.
Right.
So it is very
like to see these things.
Yeah. It is very difficult to accept that the remarkable and the very extensive copper mines in the region of Lake Superior were ever the works of American aborigines. Despite the astonishing extent of these mines, nothing has ever been found to indicate that the region was ever inhabited by permanent dwellers. Quote, not a dwelling, not a skeleton, nor a bone has been found, unquote. And the Indians have no traditions relating to the mines.
I still like the idea of the ant people
Right.
being the miners.
Yeah.
The the natives observed
Yes.
coming in and out of the ground, carrying stuff with like long trails that go to the coast.
Right. Yes.
Just
The
like
ant
ants.
people. Yep. W.S. Forrest in Historical Sketches of Norfolk, West Virginia. In September 1833, when some workmen were boring for water, a coin was drawn up from a depth of about 30 feet. It was about the size of an English shilling, but it was oval, an oval disc, if not a coin. The figures upon it were distinct and represented a warrior or hunter and other characters apparently of Roman origin. The means of exclusion would probably be men digging a hole, no one else looking, one of them drops a coin into the hole. As to where he got a strange coin, remarkable in shape, even that's disregarded. Up comes the coin, expressions of astonishment from the evil one who had dropped it. So this is the, it's a practical joke.
Yeah.
Right. In the American Antiquarian is copied a story by a correspondent to the Detroit News of a copper coin about the size of a 2-cent piece, said to have been found in a Michigan mound. The editor says merely that he does not endorse this find. Upon this slender basis, he buds out in the next number of the Antiquarian. The coin turns out, as we predicted, to be a fraud. You can imagine the scorn of Elijah or any of the old, more nearly real prophets. Or all things are tried by the only kind of jurisprudence we have in quasi-existence, presumed to be innocent until convicted, but they're guilty. The editor's reasoning is as phantom-like as my own, or St. Paul's, or Darwin's. The coin is condemned because it came from the same region from which, a few years before, had come some pottery that had been called fraudulent. So that's the reasoning of the guy. In this area, there was some fraudulent pottery from before, so this coin is also probably a fraud.
Yeah.
The pottery had been condemned because it was condemnable. Scientific American, June 17th, 1882. A farmer in Illinois had picked up on his farm a bronze coin, which was sent to Professor F. F. Hilder of St. Louis, who identified it as a coin of Antiochus IV. Inscriptions said to be in ancient Greek characters translated as King Antiochus Epiphanes Illustrious the Victorious. It sounds quite definite and convincing, but we do have some more translations coming. In the American Pioneer, there are shown two faces of a copper coin with characters very much like those upon the Grave Creek stone, which, with translations, we'll take up soon. This coin is said to have been found in Connecticut in 1843. In Records of the Past, Volume 12, in early 1913, a coin, said to be a Roman coin, was reported as discovered in an Illinois mound. It was sent to Dr. Emerson of the Art Institute of Chicago. His opinion was that the coin is of the rare mintage of Domitianus, emperor in Egypt. As to its discovery in an Illinois mound, Dr. Emerson disclaims responsibility. But what strikes me here is that a joker should not have been satisfied with an ordinary Roman coin. Where did he get this rare coin, and why was it not missed from some collection? I have looked over numismatic journals enough to accept that the whereabouts of every rare coin in anyone's possession is known to these collectors. Seems to me nothing left but to call this another identification. So I think the point there is that this Dr. Emerson at the Art Institute in Chicago identifies the coin, right, as a Hellenistic period, an emperor in Egypt. It's extremely rare, but a known thing.
Yeah.
And so Fort's like, so what, a practical joker drops it in an Illinois mound? Right. Where did he get this rare coin in the first place?
And then he's not going to be able to keep it
right
after that.
Yeah. And Fort also says that he thinks that such a coin would have been missed in somebody's collection because all these numismatic people know what all these other collectors have. Which I don't know about that. It's like surely people keep stuff secret, right?
But still, why would you get rid of an artifact like that? Just, I don't know.
Yeah, it just seems like a strange explanation. But I think in this professor's defense, he doesn't try to say that it was a practical joke.
Yeah.
Where does it say it? As to its discovery in the mound, Dr. Emerson disclaims responsibility. He just is like, I don't know what to say about that, but this is the kind of coin it is.
That's interesting.
In the proceedings of the American Philosophical Society, in July 1871, a letter was received from Mr. Jacob W. Moffett of Illinois, enclosing a photograph of a coin, which he said had been brought up by him while boring from a depth of 120 feet. Of course, by conventional scientific standards, such depth has some extraordinary meaning. Paleontologists, geologists, and archaeologists consider themselves reasonable in arguing ancient origin of the far buried. We only accept depth is a pseudo-standard with us. One earthquake can bury a coin of recent mintage 120 feet below the surface. A pseudo-standard. Mm-hmm. According to a writer in the proceedings, the coin is uniform in thickness and had never been hammered out by savages. There are other tokens of the machine shop. But, according to Professor Leslie, it is an astrological amulet. There are upon it the signs of Pisces and Leo.
Wow.
Or, with due disregard, you can find signs of your great-grandmother, or of the Crusades, or of the Mayans upon anything that ever came from a 5 and 10 cent store. Anything that looks like a cat and a goldfish can be Leo and Pisces. But by due suppressions and distortions, there's nothing that can't be made to look like a cat and a goldfish, Fort says. So yeah, I do find I thought the same thing. I was like, okay, astrological symbols are interesting, but then Fort's like, well, so there's a cat and something that looks like a cat and a fish on there, and the guy's like, this is not a coin, it's an amulet.
Yeah.
Even then, whether it's an amulet or not, the person who discovered it, or the writer that wrote into proceedings, says the coin is uniform in thickness and it has tokens of a machine shop. So whether it's, an amulet, it still has, indications it was made by a machine. Professor Leslie then finds, as arbitrarily as one might find that some joker put the Brooklyn Bridge where it is, that the piece was placed there as a practical joke, though not by its present owner, and is a modern fabrication, perhaps of the 16th century, possibly Hispano-American or French-American in origin. So again, it's called a joke. It's too modern, machine marks and stuff. Of course, in his favor, we note that Professor Leslie qualifies his notions, but his disregards are that there is nothing either French or Spanish about this coin. A legend upon it is said to be, quote, somewhere between Arabic and Phoenician, without being either, unquote. Professor Winchell from Sparks from a Geologist's Hammer, page 170, says of the crude designs upon this coin, which was in his possession, scrawls of an animal and of a warrior, or of a cat and a goldfish, whichever be convenient, that they had been neither stamped nor engraved, but looked as if etched with acid. This is a method unknown in numismatics of this earth. As to the crudity upon the design of this coin and something else, that though the warrior may be, by due disregards, either a cat or a goldfish, we have to note that his headdress is typical of the American Indian. This could be explained, of course, but for fear that we might be instantly translated to the positive absolute, which may not be absolutely desirable, we prefer to have some flaws or negativeness in our own expressions. So the key point there is that this warrior that's on the coin has what looks like a kind of a Native American headdress. But,
right, but he doesn't want to state that as a fact either.
Right. Yeah. He's like, yes, it can. People are also saying it looks like a cat or a goldfish.
Yeah.
Data of more than the thrice accursed. Tablets of stone with the 10 Commandments engraved upon them in Hebrew, said to have been found in mounds in the United States. Masonic emblems, said to have been found in mounds in the United States. So we're upon the borderline of our acceptances, and we're amorphous in the uncertainties and mergings of our outline. Conventionally, or with no real reason for so doing, we exclude these things, and then, as grossly and arbitrarily and irrationally, though our attempt is always to approximate away from these negative states, as ever a Kepler, Newton, or Darwin made his selections, without which he could not have seemed to be at all, because every one of them is now seen to be an illusion, we accept that other lettered things have been found in mounds in the United States. So, I don't know why he writes it that way. Like he has to put all these extraneous thoughts in there, but he's just like, first, let's list these. There's these tablets said to have the 10 Commandments on them in Hebrew in a mound in the United States. Then there's Masonic emblems in other mounds in the United States. So I think what he's trying to say in the next long paragraph is what we do accept is that things with scripts and other emblems that don't seem to match what we know of the Native American cultures here have been found in these mounds.
Yeah.
He just...
Thanks for clearing that up.
Is it clear? I don't know. Okay, so then if we accept that inscribed things of ancient origin have been found in the United States that cannot be attributed to any race indigenous to the Western Hemisphere, that are not in any language ever heard of in the Eastern Hemisphere, there's nothing to it but to turn non-Euclidean and try to conceive of a third hemisphere, or to accept that there has been intercourse between the Western Hemisphere and some other world.
Back to the ancient aliens explanation.
Yes.
If you can't, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so
agree with the standard model of human development, and then you have to go to ancient aliens.
Right. Yeah. And so I can't tell if he's... I don't know. It's interesting. I think that he's being... Maybe the reason I can never tell is because he's being an intermediatist in all this stuff.
Yeah.
He's just like, here, let's lay out the things that people say. Let's lay out the things that are accepted. And if it is said that this is true, and this is also true, and this is also true, then we must accept this.
Yeah.
So that's why he says all this stuff about Newton and Kepler and Darwin, who are making selections and stuff. You know, but a lot of them are seen to be illusions. He's just like, basically what it comes down to is, if we accept that inscribed things of ancient origin have been found in the United States, that they can't be attributed to the indigenous populations, they don't have any known Eastern languages or Western languages, then they must have come from somewhere else. But I think I would add to this that it just also could be a completely unknown civilization.
Right.
Artifacts of.
Yeah.
In 1838, Mr. A.B. Tomlinson, owner of the Great Mound at Grave Creek, so this is from the Grave Creek Mound,
Grave Creek, yeah.
West Virginia, excavated the mound. And he said that in the presence of witnesses, he had found a small, flat, oval stone or disc upon which were engraved alphabetic characters. Colonel Whittlesley, an expert in these matters, said that the stone is now universally regarded by archaeologists as a fraud, that in his opinion, Mr. Tomlinson had been imposed upon. He'd been tricked. I mention it because it has been the subject of much discussion, but is now generally admitted to be a fraud, says the colonel. It is inscribed with Hebrew characters, but the forger has copied the modern instead of the ancient form of the letters. Okay, so we're skipping some here. For it says, there's a thing, it is attractive or repulsive, but its conventional reaction follows. Because it is not the stone from Grave Creek that is in Hebrew characters, either ancient or modern. It is a stone from Newark in Ohio, of which the story is told that a forger made this mistake of using modern instead of ancient Hebrew. We shall see that the inscription upon the Grave Creek stone is not in Hebrew. So he's just pointing out that there's this big mistake here. Like they've confused these two objects. And this was reported in multiple places. And he's like, no. The object he's actually talking about, because there is one, and it was found in a completely different place, and it's a totally different object, and that forger did write modern Hebrew characters on it, trying to make it look ancient, and just made a mistake. But the Grave Creek stone, he says, it does not have Hebrew on it. Colonel Whittlesley in Western Reserve Historical Tracts number 33 says that the Grave Creek stone was considered a fraud by Wilson, Squires, and Davis, which sounds like is that a law firm? Wilson, Squires, and Davis. Then he comes to the Congress of Archaeologists at Nancy in France in 1875. It's hard for Colonel Whittlesley to admit that at this meeting, which sounds important, the stone was endorsed. He reminds us of Mr. Simmons and the man who considered that he saw something. Colonel Whittlesley's somewhat tortuous expression is that the finder of the stone so imposed his views upon the Congress that it pronounced the stone genuine. Also, the stone was examined by Schoolcraft, and he gave his opinion for genuineness. Or there's only one process, and seesaw is one of its aspects. 3 or 4 fat experts on the side against us, and we find 4 or 5 plump ones on our side.
Sorry, I was reading this. Watcher posted a picture of the Grave Creek stone with translation, which is like, it's all about like, okay, there was a comet that hit the Hudson Bay and it changed the poles. There was a pole shift or something, you know. That's what it looks like.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that translation there.
In 1838, did people think the comet hit the Hudson Bay?
I don't know. I think
Yeah.
this is some kind of modern thing that somebody's like, okay, yeah, this is just basically saying that a comet hit the Earth and changed the poles and makes all of my theories proper.
It's not Hebrew, though. That's
Yeah.
the key. Okay. So what I was just reading there is that the stone was presented at the Congress of Archaeologists in France in 1875. And though it's hard for the colonel to admit, the Congress accepted the stone as genuine. He tries to explain that the reason they accepted it as genuine is because the finder imposed his views upon the Congress. That's what he said. So, but Fort then lists a couple of other experts that say it's genuine. So what Fort is saying here is like, there are 3 or 4 fat experts on the side against us, and we find 4 or 5 plump ones on our side. Then several philologists came out in favor of genuineness. Some of them translated the inscription. Okay, so here we're
Now
going to
we're
have
still talking about the Grave Creek stone,
Yes.
right? Not that, because there was another one. That
Right,
didn't
no,
say-
this is the Grave Creek
Okay.
stone, yeah. Some of them translated the inscription. Of course, as we have said, it is our method, or the method of orthodoxy, way in which all conclusions are reached, to have some awfully eminent or preponderantly plump authorities with us whenever we can. In this case, however, we feel a little apprehensive in being caught in such excellently obese but somewhat negativized company.
What is the deal?
I don't know why he's calling them fat. Maybe they were all just like large people. I have no idea. They are excellently obese. So then he gives 3 different translations by 3 different philologists. And they're so hilariously different from each other that it's awesome. Translation by by M. Jombard. Quote, "Thy orders are laws. Thou shinest impetuous elan and rapid chamois."
What?
M. Maurice Schwab. "The chief of immigration who reached these places or this island has fixed these characters forever." M. Oppert. "The grave of one who was assassinated here. May God, to revenge him, strike his murderer, cutting off the hand of his existence." Now, how different
What?
are those translations? "Thou shinest in impetuous elan and rapid chamois." I don't know. Yeah. Fort says, "I like the first one the best. I have such a vivid impression from it of someone polishing up brass or something and in an awful hurry." Because that's the elan means like vigorous,
Okay.
right? Impetuous elan, like thou shinest. I don't know. Of course, the third is more dramatic. Still, they're all very good. They are perturbations of one another, I suppose. In Tract 44, Colonel Whittlesley returns to the subject. He gives the conclusion of Major D. Hellward at the Congress of Luxembourg in 1877. "If Professor Reed and myself are right in the conclusion that the figures are neither of the Runic, the Phoenician, the Canaanite, the Hebrew, the Libyan, Celtic, or any other alphabet language, its importance has been greatly overrated." It is said that an ideal of science is to find out the new, but in this case, unless a thing be of the old, it seems unimportant. So in other words, I think what this guy is saying is that because we can't identify the language, it's not important. And Fort finds that strange, which is like, well, wait, do you think you've identified all possible languages?
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
so then the inscribed axe or wedge, which according to Dr. John C. Evans in a communications to the American Ethnological Society, was plowed up near Pemberton in New Jersey in 1859. The characters upon this axe or wedge are strikingly similar to the characters on the Grave Creek stone.
I think it says Y plus chicken foot times A for telephone pole. That's the first line.
Okay. I see it.
Yeah.
X is less than 1, which is greater than T.
Yep.
And then the telephone poles fall.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. We can translate this. Okay. Also, so he's talking about an axe or wedge, which was found in New Jersey. With a little disregard here and a little more there, these marks look like tracks in the snow by someone who's been out celebrating, or like your handwriting or mine when we think there's a certain distinction in illegibility. Method of disregard, anything is anything. So on that one, I think he's saying that they've just, like, some people think they thought there might be symbols on this object, but they've decided it's just random scratches. It's been interesting to me to go over various long-established periodicals and note controversies between attempting positivists and then intermediatistic issues. There's not a notion in this book that has a more frightful or ridiculous mane than had the notion of human footprints in rock, when that now respectable ruffian or clown was first heard from. It seems bewildering to one whose interests are not scientific that such rows should be raised over such trifles, but the feeling of a systematist towards such an intruder is just about what anyone's would be if a tramp from the street should come in, sit at one's dinner table, and say he belonged there. We know what hypnosis can do. Let him insist with all his might that he does belong there, and one begins to suspect that he might be right, and that he may have higher perceptions of what's right. The prohibitionists had this worked out very skillfully. So the row that was raised over the stone from Grave Creek, but time and cumulativeness and the very factor we make so much of, or the power of massed data. There were other reports of inscribed stones, and then half a century later, some mounds, or caches as we call them, were opened by the Reverend Mr. Gass near the city of Davenport. In American Antiquarian, they list this, volume 15. Several stone tablets were found. Upon one of them, the letters TFTOWNS may easily be made out. Team Fortress Towns is what I see there. In this instance, we hear of nothing of fraudulency, time, cumulativeness, and the power of massed data. The attempt to assimilate this data is that the tablet was probably of Mormon origin. Why? Because at Minden, Illinois, was found a brass plate upon which were similar characters. So why did they mention that? Because that was found, quote, near a house once occupied by a Mormon, unquote. In a real existence, a real meteorologist, suspecting that cinders had come from a fire engine, would have asked a fireman. So see, we're like 4 chapters down from that story. And he finally says what his problem with Mr. Simmons' conclusion there was. He doesn't ask the fireman.
Okay. Yeah, I remember that.
So he finally says it clearly, and he's doing it in order to compare to this, because the tablets of Davenport, there's not a record findable that it ever occurred to any antiquarian to ask a Mormon. Yeah. They just say, it's probably a Mormon thing.
Yeah.
You just leave it at that. Nobody ever asks any Mormons about it. Other tablets were found. Upon one of them are 2 Fs and 2 8s. Also a large tablet, 12 inches by 8 to 10 inches with, quote, Roman numerals and Arabic, unquote. It is said that the figure 8 occurs 3 times and the figure or letter O 7 times. Quote, with these familiar characters are others that resemble ancient alphabets, either Phoenician or Hebrew, unquote. But where will you read of them in anything subsequently published? What antiquarian has ever since tried to understand them and their presence and indications of antiquity in a land that we're told was inhabited only by unlettered savages? These things that are exhumed only to be buried in some other way. Another tablet was found at Davenport by Mr. Charles Harrison, president of the American Antiquarian Society. Quote, 8 and other hieroglyphs are upon this tablet, unquote. This time, fraud is not mentioned. My own notion is that it is very unsportsmanlike ever to mention fraud. You should accept anything and then explain it in your way. It's unsportsmanlike.
So if it's fake, then you explain how it's a fake?
Yeah, you don't have to say this is fraudulent.
Okay.
You just say, well, I've studied this object and it looks like a modern, here's the reason like it looks modern and here's what I see about the script. You don't ever call anybody a fraudster or trickster or whatever. It's unsportsmanlike. And this last one was found by Charles Harrison, president of the American Antiquarian Society, which is why they don't say it's a fraud, right? This guy couldn't have been defrauded by this. But I really like this paragraph here. Where will you read of them in anything subsequently published? What antiquarian or archaeologist or anthropologist has ever since tried to understand them and their presence and their indications of antiquity in a land we're told was inhabited only by unlettered savages?
Yeah.
And this is what this is why he says these things are exhumed and then buried in a different way.
Damned.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I wonder if anybody's done work on that stone in modern times.
That's a good question.
In our modern times.
Yeah.
The most interesting thing to me about it is this
There's like a diagram at the bottom.
symbol or diagram at the
Yeah.
bottom. Yeah, it doesn't look like an alphabet or letters. It looks like, I guess that could be a signature.
It could be
It's a strange signature, but I would like to see like, well, how close is this to a right angle?
Yeah.
I don't know, the little dot.
Yes,
and
it
its
looks very
position is-
precise. It's like,
Yeah.
it looks like a diagram or I don't know. It's pointing at something or, I don't know. That looks like it could be a very, very abstract map.
Yep.
Here's a pond. Here are the angles.
And that's what this guy's translation was. It's like, this is Hudson Bay.
Mm-hmm. Right. But he's turned it. Oh, is he reading it from top to bottom like that?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, he's reading it in columns.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, you got more? Are we taking a break or what?
Yeah, I think it's break time.
All right.
I do have some more, I think. Yeah.
We'll be right back. And we're back. Final segment of the final hour here on Brothers of the Serpent podcast. And I brought us our Chipperagua beers. Happy birthday, buddy.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks for everything you do.
That's random.
Yes.
The song?
Yeah. I
should
should post that one.
Yeah, I should post that one. That's a good one. That's the one I used for, is it the one no. It's not the one I used for the space Dancing with the Stars.
No. That was
Yeah, random's good. I'll post it.
Stalactite.
Yeah, that one will have to go up sometime soon, too. Okay. So at the end there, Fort was saying it's unsportsmanlike to mention fraud. But he says in relation to this stone tablet at Davenport found by Charles Harrison, who was the president of the American Antiquarian Society, that Mormons are lugged in again. But the attempt is faint and helpless, quote, because general circumstances make it difficult to explain the presence of these tablets, unquote.
So you think a lot of these people were they were suspicious of Mormons because the Mormons were claiming that they were finding ancient writings on tablets?
Yeah.
And so they're like, yeah, Mormon threw this in here just to like,
Yeah. It could be that. That's true. But in this case, the quotation is, it's just general circumstances make it difficult to explain the presence.
Yeah.
In other words, how did Mormons get it?
I like it though. I think that anything that's found that's looks like it's supposed to be really ancient that has writing on it here in the Americas.
A tablet, yeah.
We should blame it on Mormons.
We should just blame it on the Mormons. Yeah, that's it. A bizarre little lost soul rescued from one of the morgues of the American Journal of Science. An account sent by a correspondent to Professor Silliman. I'm sure that's not how you say it. Of something that was found in a block of marble taken November 1829 from a quarry near Philadelphia. The block was cut into slabs. By this process, it is said, was exposed an indentation in the stone, about 1.5 inches by 5/8 of an inch. It was a geometric indentation. In it were two definite-looking raised letters, like the letter I and the letter U. The only difference is that the corners of the U are not rounded, but they are right angles. We are told that this block of stone came from a depth of 70 or 80 feet, or that, if acceptable, this lettering was done long, long ago. To some persons, not sated with the commonness of the incredible that has to be accepted, it may seem grotesque to think that an indentation in sand could have tons of other sand piled upon it and hardened into stone without being pressed out. But the famous Nicaraguan footprints were found in a quarry under 11 strata of solid rock. The only problem I have with this is, and I've seen drawings of this object and have read about it in other places, the letters IU found, it's marble, which is metamorphic. It's not sandstone or sedimentary, you know. That's what's weird about it. They're quarrying marble.
What's the point? Like, because
in other words, it's so if you dig out marble and it's buried in the marble somehow is some kind of weird impression. You can't say that it was cut into it when it was still sedimentary because marble has gone through some kind of metamorphic process.
Okay. Yeah.
So like a nail, if you found a nail in a piece of marble, that implies that the nail survived the metamorphic process.
Yeah.
Which maybe that would happen. It's iron. I don't know. But letters cut into whatever sediment that then got subducted and, you know, the way that they think marble is formed. And it gets all twisted and,
yeah,
you know,
marbled.
So, right. Yes, it becomes marbled. So I don't know. So it's interesting to me how Fort, you know, he's like, it's difficult to understand how you have an indentation in sand, and this could have tons of other sand piled upon it and hardened into stone without it being pressed out. And that's correct. Maybe that would happen. But to go through the metamorphic process to become marble and still have it, I don't know. So,
right.
Yeah.
So what about the machine that just like makes things randomly appear within stone?
Yeah, that could do it. Yeah.
Shamir.
Yeah, just a shamir, yeah. As to lettered stones that may once upon a time have been showered upon Europe, if we cannot accept that the stones were inscribed by indigenous inhabitants of Europe, many have been found in caves whence they were carried as curiosities by prehistoric men, or as ornaments, I suppose. About the size and shape of the Grave Creek stone or disc, quote, flat and oval and about 2 inches wide, unquote. Characters painted upon them, found first by M. Piet in the cave, the cave of Mas Diazil. According to Solis, they are marked in various directions with red and black lines. Quote, but on not a few of them, more complex characters occur, which in a few instances simulate some of the capital letters of the Roman alphabet, unquote. In one instance, the letters F, E, and I, accompanied by no other markings to modify them, are as plain as they could be. According to Solis in Ancient Hunters, page 95, M. Cartihac has confirmed the observations of Piet, and M. Boole has found additional examples. They offer one of the darkest problems of prehistoric time, says Solis. So this is painted and found in a cave, but it has what clearly looks like alphabetic characters on it, which these people don't accept that these very prehistoric people had alphabets.
Yeah.
I do like what Fort says here about, it doesn't necessarily mean that these prehistoric people made these things, but they found them and carried them into their caves because they also found them interesting.
Yes.
Which still doesn't make them alien objects. They could just be from a much more ancient, advanced civilization. Even if by advanced we only mean maritime and had an alphabet and writing.
Right.
Okay. Mr. J.H. Hooper from the Bradley Company in Tennessee, having come upon a curious stone in some woods upon his farm, investigated. He dug, and he unearthed a long wall. Upon this wall were inscribed many alphabetic characters. 872 characters have been examined. Many of them are duplicates, and a few imitations of animal forms, the moon, and other objects. Accidental imitations of Oriental alphabets are numerous. But the part that seems significant is that these letters had been hidden under a layer of cement.
Like they were like the wall was like plastered on or something?
Yeah. So somebody wrote on the wall and then plastered over it.
And the whole thing was buried.
Yeah, this guy dug it out. I remember reading about this somewhere else too. 872 characters have been examined, and not all of them look like necessarily alphabetic, but some of them were symbolic, like moon, a crescent, animals. But clearly the plaster is gone, but the evidence that there had been plaster over it was still there.
Yeah.
Now here's one I found really interesting. The Chinese seals of Ireland. Not the things with the big wistful eyes that lie on ice, says Fort, and that are taught to balance objects on their noses. We are talking of inscribed stamps with which to make impressions. From the Proceedings of the Royal Irish Academy, Volume 1, a paper was read by Mr. J. Hubbard Smith, descriptive of about a dozen Chinese seals that had been found in Ireland. They are all alike. Each is a cube with an animal seated upon it. Quote, "It is said that the inscriptions upon them are of a very ancient class of Chinese characters," unquote. So I guess the animal is the handle. It's like a cube.
Okay.
The bottom of the cube has the imprint on it, and the animal sits on top of the cube, and that's the handle you hold. Agreement among archaeologists that there were no relations in the remote past between China and Ireland, that no other objects from ancient China, virtually I suppose, have ever been found in Ireland, and the great distance at which these seals have been found apart in Ireland. After Mr. Smith's investigations, if he did investigate or do more than just record, many more Chinese seals were found in Ireland, and with one exception, only in Ireland. In 1852, about 60 of them have been found. Of all archaeological finds in Ireland, quote, "none is enveloped in greater mystery." That's from Chambers' journal. Dr. Fraser says that they appear to have been sown broadcast over the country in some strange way that I cannot offer a solution of.
Here we go. They rained down.
That's right. Another quote from Dr. Fraser, quote, "The invariable story of their find is what we might expect if they had been accidentally dropped," unquote. 3 were found in Tipperary, 6 in Cork, 3 in Down, 4 in Waterford, and all the rest, 1 or 2 to a county. But one of these Chinese seals was found in the bed of a river near Clonard in Meath, where workmen were raising gravel. That one, at least, had been dropped there.
So the other ones had actually been excavated out of...
I guess. It doesn't say exactly how they were found, but yeah, like they were scattered all over the entire country.
Yeah, because there's no reason... I mean, it just depends on how they were found. Because at the time, it...
Oh, okay. Let me find this spot. I didn't mark it. Right here, yeah. According to the writer in Chambers' journal, one of the seals was found in a curiosity shop in London, and when questioned, the shopkeeper said that it had come from Ireland.
Yeah.
So yeah, that doesn't tell you again, like where they dug out, where they found in a plowed field or
Yeah,
whatever.
because if they're being recorded, but they're being found not in an archaeological dig, then you can't say that it didn't arrive recently.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
but I guess I would go back to these investigations these people are doing, these archaeologists and anthropologists, and they're like, there's nothing else in Ireland, archaeologically speaking, that is enveloped in more mystery than this. So I think that that implies that they think that they're old. Otherwise, they would just say, well, yeah, maybe these have been traded in recent times, and somehow they've been scattered all over the country. There was a hoax fad of Chinese seals in Ireland in the 1850s or something, but they find it mysterious. Anyway, chapter 12, Astronomy, and a watchman looking at half a dozen lanterns where a street's been torn up. There are gas lights and kerosene lamps and electric lights in the neighborhood, matches flaring, fires and stoves, bonfires, houses afire somewhere, lights of automobiles and illuminated signs. But the watchman has his one little system. I think he's comparing this to what astronomers do. This guy's watching the street, and there's all this stuff going on, but he's paying no attention to any of that. He's looking at the lamps.
Okay. Yeah, I totally did not get that.
Yeah, the watchman is looking at half a dozen lanterns.
Okay.
Right? Just making sure that they stay lit. Yeah. There's all this other light happening, but he's just looking at the lanterns.
Okay.
If several persons start out to Chicago and they get to Buffalo, and one of them is under the delusion that Buffalo is Chicago, that one will be a resistance to the progress of the others. So astronomy and its seemingly exact little system. But data we shall have of round worlds and spindle-shaped worlds, and worlds shaped like a wheel, and worlds like titanic pruning hooks, and worlds linked together by streaming filaments, and solitary worlds in hordes, tremendous worlds and tiny worlds. Some of them made of material like the material of this earth, and some worlds that are geometric superconstructions made of iron and steel. Or they not only fall from the sky of ashes and cinders and coke and charcoal and oily substances that suggest fuel, but the masses of iron that have fallen upon this earth. Wrecks and flotsam and fragments of vast iron constructions, or steel. Sooner or later, we shall have to take up an expression that fragments of steel have fallen from the sky. If fragments not of iron but of steel have fallen upon this earth. But what would a deep-sea fish learn, even if a steel plate of a wrecked vessel above him should drop and bump him on the nose? Sometimes, Fort says, I'm a savage who has found something on the beach of his island, and sometimes I'm a deep-sea fish with a sore nose. The greatest of mysteries, why don't they ever come here or send here openly? So again, this is the question of the extraterrestrials. This is still being asked.
Yep.
Of course, there's nothing to that mystery if we don't take so seriously the notion that we must be interesting. It's probably for moral reasons that they stay away. But even so, there must be some degraded ones among them, right? So this, again, I find this, right? You know, you're like, well, if they have like the prime directive, well, surely they have criminals.
Yeah.
Or physical reasons. When can we specially take up that?
Do ants have criminals? Do the bee colonies have criminals?
That's a good question. They probably don't survive long if there's something wrong with them, they get killed by the rest of the hive, usually. But I do know that with beehives, you can completely transfer some bees into another hive, and they'll completely change allegiances.
Assimilate, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
When can we specially take up that subject? One of our leading ideas or credulities will be that near approach by another world to this world would be catastrophic, that navigable worlds would avoid proximity, that others that have survived have organized into protective remoteness, or orbits which approximate to regularity, though by no means to the degree of popular supposition. But the persistence of the notion that we must be interesting, bugs and germs and things like that, they are interesting to us. Some of them are too interesting, and meaning that they can kill you. Dangers of near approach. Nevertheless, our own ships that dare not venture close to a rocky shore can send out rowboats. Why not missionaries? sent here openly to convert us from our barbarous prohibitions and other taboos, and to prepare the way for a good trade in ultra Bibles and super whiskeys. Ultra Bibles and super whiskeys. The answer that occurs to me is so simple that it seems immediately acceptable. If we accept that the obvious is the solution of all problems, or if most of our perplexities consist in laboriously and painfully conceiving of the unanswerable, and then looking for the answers, using such words as obvious and solution conventionally, would we, if we could, educate and sophisticate pigs or geese or cattle? Would it be wise to establish diplomatic relations with the hen that now functions satisfied with mere sense of achievement by way of compensation? I think we're property. I should say, we belong to something. And once upon a time, this earth was no man's land, that other worlds explored and colonized here, fought among themselves for possession, but that now it's owned by something. That something owns this earth and all others are warned off. Nothing in our own times, perhaps, because I am thinking of certain notes I have ever appeared on this earth from somewhere else so openly as Columbus landed upon San Salvador or as Hudson sailed up his river. But as to surreptitious visits to this earth in recent times, or as to emissaries, perhaps from other worlds, or voyagers who have shown every indication of intent to evade and avoid, we shall have data as convincing as our data of oil or coal-burning aerial superconstructions. I suspect that, after all, we are useful, that among contesting claimants, adjustment has occurred, or that something now has a legal right to us by force or by having paid out analogs of beads to us, or bees for us to former more primitive owners, and all others have been warned off. That all this has been known perhaps for ages to certain ones upon this earth, a cult or order, members of which function like bellwethers to the rest of us, or as superior slaves or overseers, directing us in accordance with instructions received from somewhere else in our mysterious usefulness.
Yeah, that's very Gods of Eden.
Yes.
Esque.
He's going full Bramley there. Or I guess Bramley was going full Fort.
Full Fort.
But I accept that in the past, before proprietorship was established, inhabitants of a host of other worlds have dropped here, hopped here, wafted, sailed, flown, and motored, walked here for all I know, or been pulled here, pushed, have come singly, have come in enormous numbers, have visited occasionally, have visited periodically for hunting, trading, replenishing harems, and mining, have been unable to stay here, or have established colonies here, and have been lost here. Giants and fairies. We accept them, of course, or, if we pride ourselves upon being awfully far advanced, I don't know how to sustain our conceit except by very largely going far back. Science of today, the superstition of tomorrow. Science of tomorrow, the superstition of today. There's a notice of a stone axe, 17 inches long, 9 inches across the broad end, from the Proceedings of the Society of something of Scotland. And the American Antiquarian has a copper.
How big was it?
17 inches long, 9 inches across the broad end.
And that's just the
axe
just
head.
The blade, the head.
Yeah.
Wow.
A stone axe over a foot long.
Wow.
9 inches across.
17 inches, yeah. It's almost a foot and a half.
Yeah. A copper axe from an Ohio mound was listed in the American Antiquarian. 22 inches long, weighed 38 pounds. A stone axe found at Birchwood in Wisconsin, exhibited in the collection of the Missouri Historical Society, found with, quote, the pointed end embedded in the soil, unquote. And for all I know, it may have dropped there that way. It was 28 inches long, 14 inches wide, 11 inches thick, and weighed 300 pounds.
Oh, my gosh. Ceremonial.
Of course. He's talking about giants right now.
That's crazy.
Though. Yeah. Or the footprints in Sandstone near Carson in Nevada. Each print 18 to 20 inches long. This is listed in the American Journal of Science. These footprints are very clear and well-defined. Reproductions of them in the journal. but they assimilate with the system like sour apples to other systems. So Professor Marsh, a loyal and unscrupulous systematist, argues, quote, "The size of these footprints, and especially the width between the left and right series, are strong evidence that they were not made by men as has been so generally supposed," unquote. The reasoning of this representative phantom of the chosen, or of the spectral appearances who sit in judgment or condemnation upon us of the more nearly real, that there were never giants upon this earth, because gigantic footprints are more gigantic than prints made by men who are not giants. Which is him reiterating what this guy said.
They're not giants because they could.
The gigantic footprints are too big.
Yeah. They're too big to be made by men who are not giants.
That's right.
That's great.
Okay. We might be coming close to the end of what I've got marked here. Let's see. All right. So we now come to some cursed little things that are of the lost, but for the salvation of which scientific missionaries have done their damnedest. Pygmy flints. They can't very well be denied. They're lost, but they are well known. Pygmy flints are tiny prehistoric implements. Some of them are only 1/4 of an inch in size. England, India, France, South Africa. They've been found in many parts of the world, whether showered there or not. They belong high up in the froth of the accursed. They are not denied, and they have not been disregarded. There is an abundant literature upon the subject. One attempt to rationalize them or assimilate them or take them into the scientific fold has been the notion that they were toys of prehistoric children. This sounds reasonable, but of course by the reasonable we mean that for which the equally reasonable but opposing has not been found out, except that we modify that by saying that though nothing's finally reasonable, some phenomena have higher approximations to reasonable than have others. Against the notion of toys, the higher approximation is that where pygmy flints are found, all flints are pygmies, at least so in India, where when larger implements have been found in the same place, there are separations by strata.
1/4 inch. I would like to see one of these.
The data that, just at present, leads me to accept that these flints were made by beings about the size of pickles is a point brought out by Professor Wilson from the report of the National Museum in 1892. Not only that the flints are tiny, but that the chipping upon them is minute. In Science Gossip in 1896, page 36, R.A. Galty says, quote, "So fine is the chipping that to see the workmanship a magnifying glass is necessary," unquote.
Watcher, you can bring up these pickle flints.
Do we still have a watcher? Oh, just one of them left.
Yeah.
Only one watch. We still have two watch. Okay, we still have one watch.
Pygmy flints. Made by Pickle Rick.
London Times, July 20th, 1836. Early in July 1836, some boys were searching for rabbits' burrows in the rocky formation near Edinburgh, known as Arthur's Seat. In the side of a cliff, they came upon some thin sheets of slate, which they pulled out. And there was a little cave, and in the cave was 17 tiny coffins, 3 or 4 inches long. In the coffins were miniature wooden figures. They were dressed differently both in style and material. There were 2 tiers of 8 coffins each, and a third tier was begun with only 1 coffin. The extraordinary data, which has especially made mystery here, is that the coffins had been deposited singly in the little cave at intervals of many years. In the first tier, the coffins were quite decayed, and the wrappings had moldered away. In the second tier, the effects of age had not advanced so far, and the top coffin was quite recent looking. In the Proceedings of the Society of Antiquarians of Scotland, there is a full account of this find. 3 of the coffins and 3 of the figures are pictured. That one is interesting to me.
I missed it. I was trying to figure out if we were still connected to the Watcher.
Oh, sorry. Basically a fairy burial.
Miniature coffins?
Yes. 3 or 4 inches long each.
Wow.
With effigies buried in them. So I'm skipping a whole bunch of stuff where he talks about fairies, and he, in his Fortean way, he gives names to the planets that he's imagining the fae people come from and the giants come from. So we have Gigantorium or whatever, and Elveria. Or Elvera. Monstrator, that's what he calls the Monstrator. The inhabitants of Monstrator and Elvera. They're primitives, I think, at the time of their occasional visits to the Earth.
They were primitives when they visited here.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's another thing. It's like, is it possible that incredibly tiny life forms could be intelligent and develop technology that, like, we can't even see it with the naked eye?
Yeah. I think so. I mean, couldn't they make use, like we think of, like that with size comes complexity, but that's not true. Like it's scale invariant in terms of complexity, right? The more you look in the microscopic scale, the more it's still just as complex.
Yeah.
So could very tiny beings, like say ant-sized beings, actually have full be smarter in general than the human race and have like a really advanced civilization and build giant spaceships? Yeah, I think so. Right? They might be better engineers because they work on this tiny level.
Yeah.
History is a department of human delusion that interests us. We are able to give a little advancement to history in the vitrified forts of parts of Europe. This is the last bit that I have marked for this week. The vitrified forts surrounding England, but they're not in England. The vitrified forts are in Scotland and Ireland and Brittany and Bohemia. So, I guess I'll read this part. I didn't mark this part about Azuria. So he's got this another, he gives names to these worlds that he imagines might exist. Azuria is the name of the world of the blue people. Okay.
Yeah, you got it.
So the people of the blue planet, Azuria, have moved into Britain, England. He was talking earlier, like early in the chapter, I didn't read this, but he was talking about the Celts, and he's like, they said they were painted blue, but he's like, what if they were like actually like just blue people? Okay. So here you go. Once upon a time, with electric blasts, Azuria tried to swipe this earth clear of the people who resisted her. The vast blue bulk of Azuria appeared in the sky. Clouds turned green. The sun was formless and purple in the vibrations of wrath that were emanating. The whitish or yellowish or brownish peoples of Scotland, Ireland, Brittany, and Bohemia fled to hilltops and built forts. In a real existence, hilltops, or easiest accessibility to an aerial enemy, would be the last choice in refuges. But here in quasi-existence, if we're accustomed to run to hilltops in times of danger, we run to them just the same, even with the danger closest to hilltops. Very common in quasi-existence, attempt to escape by running closer to the pursuing. So they built forts, or they already had forts on hilltops, and something poured electricity upon them. The stones of these forts exist to this day, vitrified or melted and turned to glass. The archaeologists have jumped from one conclusion to another, like the rapid chamois we read of a while ago, to account for vitrified forts. So archaeologists, in their medieval dread of excommunication, have tried to explain vitrified forts in terms of terrestrial experience. We find in their insufficiencies the same old assimilating of all that could be assimilated and disregard for the unassimilable, conventionalizing into the explanation that vitrified forts were made by prehistoric peoples who built vast fires, often remote from wood supplies, to melt externally and cement together the stones of their constructions. But negativeness always, so within itself a science, can never be homogeneous or unified or harmonious. So Miss Russell in the Journal of the BAA has pointed out that it is seldom that single stones, to say nothing of long walls of large houses that are burned to the ground, are ever vitrified. If we pay a little attention to this subject ourselves before starting to write upon it, which is one of the ways of being more nearly real than opposition so far encountered by us, we find that the stones of these forts are vitrified in no reference to cementing them, that they are cemented here and there in streaks, as if special blasts had struck or played upon them. So one thinks maybe of lightning. Once upon a time, something melted in streaks the stones of forts on the tops of hills in Scotland, Ireland, Brittany, and Bohemia. Lightning selects the isolated and conspicuous, but some of the vitrified forts are not upon tops of hills. Some are very inconspicuous. Their walls, too, though, are vitrified in streaks. Something once had effect similar to lightning upon forts, mostly on hills in Scotland, Ireland, Brittany, and Bohemia. But on hills all over the rest of the world are remains of forts that are not vitrified.
Yeah, that is really strange.
I thought that was a great and concise.
Yeah, I agree.
That was fort in fine form. Fine form fort. All right.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Perfect timing, too.
Yes. That was, I was worried that I was like, man, I think I'm getting close to the end of what I've marked here. But nope, had just enough.
Yep. And before we get going here, I want to mention our executive producer of this show, Douglas Chick.
Hey.
He says, I enjoy having my mind being blown by the noodle-scratching topics you slithery bros dive into. Have you ever considered doing a segment or an episode on the Carrington event? Love you guys, relax and I love you guys relaxing and inquisitive style. Keep up the great work. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. $100 donation makes you an executive producer of this show 234. And we really appreciate that.
We do.
And also,
Thank you so much.
I think we should do an episode on the Carrington
We
event.
definitely
that would be really
should.
cool. And then associate executive producer for this show, Gregg Taylor. $50 donation with no note in here.
No note.
Thank you very much for the donations, guys. Appreciate it. And
we have a couple of other ones. Let me get them here.
are we adding the? We were
gonna
supposed
add-
to do this last show.
Yeah, we're supposed to do this last show, but I completely forgot, so I'm doing it now. So we have monthly donors. We've got 3 executive producers, Frank and Zachariah, Frank M., Zachariah Baker, and Peter Shell, all donating through the Patreon at $72 a month. Those are executive producers for last month. I forgot to do it. Sorry about that. And then we also have associate executive producers, Daniel Gandy, Dave Cortes, and Patrick Hicks.
Oh, the patron saint.
The patron saint of the Brothers of the Serpent podcast, associate executive producers for last month. Thank you guys so much. We appreciate all the donations, whether it's through Patreon or PayPal or however, Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever shitcoin you want to send us, let me know. Where's my paper? There it is. So, Brothers of the Serpent at gmail.com if you guys want to get a hold of us. Send us emails. I will read them. I always read them all. I can't read them all on the show, but that is how I prefer to respond. Website, brothersoftheserpent.com. That's where you can find all the podcast-related stuff, including the encyclopedia and the glossary. The Snakeskins, which is our merchandise store, where you can get lots of T-shirts and other cool merchandise, and a bunch of them are actually made by Jeff. And, hey, if any other artists have ideas and you can make yourself a TeePublic store, I can add them to the, if it's Brothers of the Serpent related stuff, I can add them to our store, and then you'll get paid when people buy them.
Yep.
Yeah. Always glad to add cool stuff. Jeff's made a bunch of interesting things. Well, all I have is the logo stuff in there. He's made all kinds of cool stuff.
Old Johnson
And we
shirt.
also have the, what's the place? T-shirts, etc. Is that who makes the hats? The embroidered. Oh man. You can also buy very nice embroidered hats from our website. There are links there to do that. And they have told me that if somebody wants some other kind of hat or clothing or whatever with the embroidered logo, you just need to call them, and you can do that. Yeah, I think it's T-shirts, etc. Right? Kyle's looking it up right now.
Turn it up.
T-shirts, etc.
Okay, you're good.
Yeah.
I always forget that. I know him as So What, which
Right.
is SEW. what?
Yeah.
Because that's a store that I pass all the time.
Right.
So the other one is at a different location, or that's just their online store?
Yeah, that's where they do, and that's where they make all the embroidery. I think Sewed is like a branch.
Yeah, okay.
That's what I've been told. I don't know the details. I just know that they have a beautiful embroidered logo, and they can put it on most articles of clothing that you want.
Yeah.
And if they don't,
And thanks so much to them for doing that. For
yeah.
us.
And if I've also heard that if they don't particularly have whatever thing you want it embroidered on, you can send them it, and they will embroider it on there and send it back to you.
Yeah.
They're
awesome.
they're a local company, and they're easy to work with. Just give them a call if you've got some weird, like, strange thing you want it embroidered on that nobody has. You buy it, you mail it to them, they'll embroider the logo on it and send it back to you. Join the Discord. That's our big chat server. It's run by Jeff. We got a whole bunch of other admins, including Chip, whose birthday it is today, which we mentioned before. Bunch of great admins in there, bunch of great people. It's an awesome place to chat with other Snake Force members and discuss mysteries. There's always a ton of conversations going on in there about all kinds of interesting stuff, and people like deep dive into rabbit holes in there. So join it if you want to do that, and you will be expected to pass a test if you try to join.
Also, go to contactthecabin.com. Check out the tours we're doing. Let's see, we got the one in Utah coming up.
Yeah, I think that one's sold out though.
Oh, is it really?
Yeah.
Well, too late for that. But anyway, yeah.
We do have the Scablands ones coming up and the Montana one.
Yep.
And there's also the, this is happening. This is supposed to happen like this week or maybe starting next week is the Randwolf Middle Cumberland tour. So if anybody's interested in a late sign up for that, there are still spots available.
Yeah, and you would go to randallcarlson.com.
Yes, randallcarlson.com.
All right.
Yeah. Thanks, guys. We love you.
Always have.
Always will.
Good night, Adamu.
Get back to work.